I was 19, sitting on the edge of my mom's couch with my daughter's jacket still in my hands, when she looked at me and said I was too immature to raise a child. She didn't say it quietly. She said it like she wanted the words to bruise me. At that time, she wasn't wrong. I was drinking too much, staying out with people who didn't care about me, and pretending everything was fine. I thought she was just judging me like she always did, but I didn't know she and my sister were already planning something behind my back. When the court documents showed up at my door, everything I tried to ignore suddenly turned into a fight I wasn't ready for. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. My life as a 19-year-old mom wasn't pretty. Most mornings started with me waking up late, rushing to find Riley's shoes, and realizing I forgot to wash her favorite cup. I worked a simple part-time job at a grocery store. The pay wasn't great, but it was the only thing I could handle while trying to take care of her. I loved my daughter more than anything, but love didn't fix my bad habits. I drank when I was stressed. I dated people who treated me like I was something to pass time with. I ignored calls from daycare when I wasn't in the mood to deal with things. It wasn't the life a mother should give her child, but I kept telling myself I would eventually get it together. My mother, Lydia, didn't believe that for a second. She was the type who liked control. She raised me and my older sister Marissa with rules taped to the fridge and consequences for everything. When I got pregnant at 16, she told me I ruined her plans for my future. When I came out as bisexual at 18, she said I was confused and irresponsible. She believed every choice I made proved she was right about me. Marissa was the one who followed every rule. She had a steady job, a nice house with her husband, and a perfect smile she used whenever she wanted to remind me she was the successful sister. She couldn't have kids, and even though she never said it, I could feel her wanting what I had. She and my mom whispered a lot whenever I brought Riley over. They gave me looks when I showed up tired or when I wore clothes they thought were too messy. My boyfriend at the time, Clay, made everything worse. He didn't like kids. He made rude jokes about Riley needing too much attention, and he acted bothered every time she cried. I stayed with him because I didn't want to be alone. My best friend Juno told me to leave him and focus on Riley, but I always nodded and then went right back to doing what I wanted. I didn't realize how much these choices were building a case against me. I didn't know my mom and sister were writing everything down and saving every mistake. The day everything shifted came during a family dinner. I walked in with Riley on my hip, tired from work and still hungover from the night before. Mom took one look at me and said loudly that she didn't understand how someone as immature as me expected to raise a child without hurting her future. I tried to defend myself, but my sister stepped in calmly and said they were worried about Riley's stability. I felt small, angry, and embarrassed. I had no idea that conversation was only the beginning of what they planned to do next. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The conflict started building long before I noticed it, but the first real sign came the morning I woke up to the sound of Riley crying in the living room. I walked out half awake and found my mom holding her while giving me that disappointed stare she saved for moments when she wanted me to feel like a failure. She said she came by because she happened to be in the area, but the way she looked around my apartment made me feel small. Clothes on the floor, dishes in the sink, half a bottle of cheap vodka still on the table from the night before. I tried to hide it with my arm, but she saw everything. She asked why the place looked like a teenager lived there, even though I was a mom now. I told her I had a long night and didn't get time to clean, but she didn't buy it. She left without saying goodbye to me, only whispering to Riley that she would always be safe with Grandma. That bothered me, but I pushed it away like I pushed everything away. A few days later, I arrived at the daycare to pick up Riley, and the teacher asked if I approved Grandma picking her up. I froze. I never approved anything. I asked when that happened, and she said Lydia had already taken Riley home once that week. I felt heat in my chest as I explained none of that was allowed. The teacher looked confused because the form had my signature on it. I stared at the paper and saw something that looked like my handwriting, but not exactly. That was the moment my stomach dropped. My mom had forced herself into a part of my life she had no business stepping into. Things got worse fast. My sister began texting me constantly, but the messages felt strange. Instead of asking how Riley was doing, she asked how many hours I worked, how many nights I stayed out, and whether I had sorted out my drinking. She said they were just checking in, but it felt like she was collecting data. Clay didn't make things any easier. He made comments like, maybe Riley should live with people who want stability, and whenever I reacted, he accused me of being dramatic. I knew he didn't like my daughter, but I didn't realize he resented her. One night, he told me Riley was ruining my life and keeping me from being fun. I should have kicked him out right there, but instead I argued, cried, apologized, and then tried to pretend he didn't mean it. Every bad choice I made in those days worked like fuel for whatever my mom and sister were building behind the scenes. The pressure kept rising. One weekend, I went to a party with Clay, thinking I deserved a break, and I drank more than I should have. I came home late and found my mom sitting on the steps outside my apartment with Riley asleep in her arms. She said she stopped by to check on me and heard Riley crying alone inside. I knew that wasn't possible because I had asked my neighbor to watch her, but the neighbor had fallen asleep and missed some of Riley's crying. My mom didn't care about the explanation. She just said, "This is not a safe home." Her voice was calm, but it cut deeper than yelling ever could. I tried to take Riley from her, but she held on a little longer than she needed to, as if she was testing what would happen if she simply refused to let go. When she finally handed her to me, she said she hoped I would think long and hard about what I was doing with my life. The breaking point came when Riley, in the soft, confused way only a 3-year-old can speak, asked me why Grandma and Aunt Marissa said she might go live in their house soon. I felt something cold move through me. I asked her who told her that, and she said Grandma said it while brushing her hair. I tried to stay calm, but inside, everything was shaking. I drove to my mom's house without thinking and demanded an explanation. She stood there with her arms crossed and said I was making choices that put Riley at risk. She said she and Marissa were discussing better options. When I told her she had no right to take my child, she simply said, "Someone has to do what you refuse to do." The next morning, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. I opened it on the kitchen floor with shaking hands. Inside were official papers filed by my mother and sister requesting emergency guardianship of Riley. Every mistake I had ever made was written in black ink, organized, dated, and supported by statements. A list of my failures stared back at me: missed daycare meetings, unstable relationships, drinking, unsafe home environment. They even had a copy of that forged daycare form. My heart twisted with fear and rage. They weren't just judging me anymore. They were trying to take my daughter. And the worst part was that I had given them enough evidence to build the case they wanted. When I first read the emergency guardianship papers, I sat on the kitchen floor in silence, feeling my entire body go warm and then cold. I wanted to pretend it was a mistake or a misunderstanding, but everything inside those documents came straight from my own life. Missed appointments, late payments, drinking, arguments with Clay, the police wellness check from months earlier when a neighbor reported Riley crying loudly, even though nothing serious happened. My mother had taken every slip, every moment of weakness, and every bad day and carefully turned it into ammunition. I wanted to rip the papers apart, but I knew that would not fix anything. I took a deep breath, stood up, and told myself I had to fight, even if the odds were against me. So I began calling lawyers. Most of them were too expensive, and one hung up the second I said I was 19, unemployed half the time, and fighting my own mother. I finally found a small law office willing to take payments. The attorney, a woman named Jordan White, met me with a serious expression and said the only chance I had was to show real effort and real change. She told me the court would make decisions based on patterns and safety, not emotions. When she asked for evidence of my stability, I felt the truth hit me in the stomach. I had nothing. No proof I was improving. No supportive statements from people. No documentation showing I had been a responsible mother. I sat there embarrassed while she pulled out forms I needed to complete and a checklist that felt impossible. Jordan told me to start with basics. Clean the apartment and take photos. Keep a consistent work schedule. attend parenting classes and sobriety meetings, finish every task she assigned, and record everything. I nodded, promising I would do whatever she said, even though a part of me doubted I could keep up. When I walked out of the office, Clay sent me a message complaining about why I was gone so long and asking if Riley was staying somewhere else because he wanted a quiet night. I stared at the message and suddenly felt embarrassed that I had allowed someone like him into Riley's life. When I got home, I told Clay I needed space. He rolled his eyes and said, "Good luck keeping that kid anyway." That was all I needed to hear. I told him to leave. He slammed the door and said I would come crawling back. I shut the lock behind him with my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that I had finally chosen my daughter over someone who did not deserve us. The next few days were a blur of effort. I threw out bottles, scrubbed the apartment, organized Riley's toys, and washed every piece of clothing we owned. I took pictures of everything as proof. I called the daycare and apologized for my behavior. I scheduled doctor appointments I had avoided. I even met with Riley's teacher and asked for advice on how to improve routines at home. Juno stayed over 2 nights in a row to help me reorganize the entire place. She told me she believed I could turn my life around and reminded me that Riley needed the version of me I kept promising to become. For the first time in months, I listened. Then I confronted my mother. I drove to her house and demanded that she stop trying to take my daughter. She stood in her doorway, unmoved, and said she was doing what I refused to do. She said she was protecting Riley from my chaos. I told her I was changing and that she needed to back off, but she only replied that it was too late and the judge would see the truth. My sister came outside and tried to calm the situation, but her calm voice only made things worse. She said that giving Riley to her was not stealing, but providing safety. Hearing that made something harden inside me. I told them both that I would fight and that they underestimated how hard a mother would fight for her child. At the same time, more red flags started showing up around Clay. A neighbor told me he had been asking questions about my case and even mentioned details I never shared with him. I replayed the argument we had before he left and realized he might have talked to my mother or sister just to get back at me. Jordan told me to document that too, since it could show manipulation. Every night, I filled out forms, wrote statements, and prepared for court like my life depended on it. I practiced what I would say. I made lists of improvements. I cried quietly when Riley slept, not out of fear, but out of anger at myself for letting things get so bad. The turning point was not a single moment. It was a decision repeated every hour of the day. To fight, to clean, to show up, to grow, to stop making excuses, to stop letting the people around me define who I was. By the time the hearing date arrived, I was exhausted, but steady. I walked into the courthouse knowing I was not perfect, but I was trying. Jordan told me to stay calm no matter what was said about me. I sat down, hands shaking, and looked across the room at my mother and sister. They seemed confident, almost relieved. I straightened my back and reminded myself that even if everyone doubted me, I was still Riley's mother, and I was finally beginning to act like one. When the judge walked in and the courtroom went quiet, my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I kept my eyes on the table, afraid that if I looked at my mother or my sister, I would fall apart before we even began. The judge started by reviewing the documents they filed. Hearing my own life read aloud like a police report made my stomach twist. Missed appointments, drinking, unsafe environment, inconsistent employment, unstable relationships. It hurt because it was real and because I had made every mistake with my own hands. My mother sat there with her back straight, confident, almost proud that she finally had the chance to prove she was right about me. My sister sat beside her, calm and polished, acting like she was rescuing my daughter instead of stealing her. When it was their turn to speak, their attorney stood up and painted a perfect picture of them as the responsible caretakers. He said they believed Riley needed stability and that I could not provide it. He said my behavior showed I was overwhelmed and that my parents' home could give Riley a better future. My mom spoke next. She said she loved me, but she was tired of watching me damage my daughter's life with reckless decisions. She talked about the night she found Riley crying alone, leaving out every detail that made it less dramatic. She talked about my drinking and my breakup with Clay. She said I refused help and refused to grow up. My sister added that they were only stepping in because their hearts were breaking watching Riley suffer. Her voice cracked just enough to make her sound sincere. The judge turned to me and asked for my response. I felt the room closing in on me. I stood up and explained everything I had changed. I talked about the photos of the apartment, the routine I started for Riley, the parenting classes, the sobriety meetings, and the commitment I was trying to build. Jordan presented the evidence I gathered. She showed the forged daycare form and told the judge it proved my mother crossed boundaries. She also played the recording where my mom admitted she was intervening without my permission. For a moment, I felt hope. The judge looked at my mother with a stern expression that made her shift uncomfortably. Then everything collapsed when Clay was called as a witness. I did not know he would be there. My stomach dropped when I saw him walk in, smirking like he had been waiting for this moment. Clay told the court I had been drinking more than I admitted. He said he worried about Riley's safety and claimed he saw me leave her alone to go drinking, which was a lie. The worst part was that there was just enough truth in his story to make the lies believable. My mother nodded along quietly, as if she had not pushed him into this. I tried to defend myself, but the damage was already done. Clay's lies combined with my real mistakes formed a picture I could not undo. The judge called for a short break. I walked into the hallway feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Jordan told me to breathe and stay focused, but I already knew what was coming. When we went back in, the judge announced his decision. Temporary guardianship would go to my sister. I would get supervised visitation only. My knees almost gave out. My mother closed her eyes like she had finally been proven right. My sister pretended to look sad, as if she had not been waiting for this outcome. I stared straight ahead, stunned, while they collected their papers with quiet satisfaction. The bailiff told me to step back while Riley would be transferred into their care within 48 hours. The sound of those words felt heavier than anything I had ever heard. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to take my daughter and never come back. But I stood there in silence because I had no strength left to fight in that moment. When the hearing ended, my mother walked past me and said, "This is for the best." Marissa added, "She will be safe now." I could not even answer them. I drove home in a fog, barely able to see through my tears. When I reached my apartment, I sat on the floor holding Riley's favorite blanket, knowing I had just lost the one thing that mattered more than anything. The weight of the loss crushed me. All the effort I made, all the changes I tried to show, all the promises I made to myself felt useless. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to hit the bottom. I had lost the first round of the fight, and the court had taken my daughter away. But, even as I cried, a tiny part of me refused to die. A small, stubborn voice inside me whispered that the story was not finished. I would not let this be the ending. I would find a way to fight again. Riley was still my daughter, and no court or parent or bitter ex could ever change that. Losing Riley shattered me in a way I never understood before. The day my sister came to take her, I stood in the doorway holding my daughter, while she clung to my shirt and cried that she did not want to go. I tried to stay calm for her, but inside, I felt like my chest was being ripped apart. When Marissa lifted her from my arms, I felt my knees weaken. I watched them walk down the stairs until they disappeared from view. The silence afterward was so heavy it felt like it was pressing me into the floor. I sat in Riley's empty room and stared at her toys until my vision blurred. I told myself that maybe my mother was right, that maybe Riley truly would be safer somewhere else. That thought broke me more than the loss itself. That night, I did the one thing I promised I would never do again. I went out drinking. I did not get drunk enough to forget, only drunk enough to stop caring for a short moment. When I woke up the next morning with a headache and guilt twisting inside me, I realized I had made everything even worse. If anyone found out I had slipped again, it could destroy any chance I had of getting her back. Juno showed up that afternoon and did not yell or judge. She just sat next to me and said she knew I was hurting, but letting myself fall apart would only help the people who wanted Riley away from me. Her words hit harder than I expected. I spent the next few days cleaning, attending meetings, and writing letters to myself about the kind of mother I wanted to be. I went to the supervised visits and held Riley like she was made of glass. My sister acted polite but distant, as if I were just a temporary guest in my own daughter's life. My mother came to one visit and stood behind Marissa with her arms crossed. She said nothing, but her silence told me she believed she had already won. I stayed quiet to avoid making anything worse. I kept telling myself that healing takes time, and this was only the middle of the story, not the end. 2 months later, something unexpected happened. Marissa's husband lost his job, and they began struggling financially. They had trouble covering daycare fees and medical costs. Their situation triggered a review of the guardianship arrangement. For the first time since losing Riley, I felt a small ray of hope. The court allowed me to present updated evidence of improvement. I collected proof of my attendance at meetings, my employment records, letters from neighbors who saw my progress, and statements from the parenting classes I completed. During the new hearing, the judge acknowledged that I had made genuine steps. He granted shared custody with supervised transitions. I walked out of that courthouse crying for the first time in weeks, but this time they were tears of relief. I began seeing Riley more often. She smiled brighter every visit, and for once I felt like I was becoming the mother she deserved. But the happiness did not last. Clay reappeared in my life through social media, pretending he wanted to apologize. I ignored him, but he found a way to create trouble anyway. One day, I got an email from my lawyer saying the court received an anonymous report claiming I had been drinking again and leaving Riley unattended. I knew immediately who sent it. My mother denied involvement, but her tone suggested she believed it was true. The report forced another investigation. A caseworker visited my home and looked through every room, checking for anything that could be used against me. The shame almost crushed me, but I stayed calm because I had nothing to hide. Even so, the damage was enough to temporarily suspend my custody rights again. Riley went back to Marissa. The pain of losing her a second time was deeper because I had worked so hard to change, only to have someone's lie undo everything. I cried until my body felt empty. For a few days, I thought about giving up completely. Maybe my mother was right, and I was not meant to raise a child. Maybe no one would ever see the effort I was putting in. But then I remembered how Riley looked at me during visits. The trust in her eyes reminded me that she saw me as her mother, no matter what anyone else said. I decided I would not let lies and manipulation steal her from me again. I asked my lawyer to subpoena Clay for questioning. I gathered screenshots of his messages. I requested statements from my meeting groups proving I had remained sober. I documented everything with dates and times. When we returned to court, Clay tried to hold on to his lies, but under pressure, he slipped. He admitted he never saw me drink recently. He admitted he never saw me leave Riley alone. He admitted he had been angry after our breakup. The judge's expression hardened immediately. The final ruling came with a weight I will never forget. The judge said I had shown consistent improvement, that the accusations against me were found to be manipulated, and that I demonstrated a sincere commitment to providing a safe home. He restored full custody to me and ordered my mother and sister to step back completely. When I walked out of that courtroom holding Riley's hand, I felt taller than I ever had. I had lost twice, fallen apart twice, and still stood up again. I had won not because I was perfect, but because I refused to stay the person they believed I was. For the first time, I felt like a real mother, and I knew I was never going back to who I used to be. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from.